Hey everyone, and welcome back to Citywide Blackout, your home for the best creators from around the world. I'm your host, Max Bowen, and joining me now, this is going to be a really fun one, folks, because you might recognize the name from last March when we talked about his debut book, The Last Exit, and he's back with a new book. Author Michael Kaufman is here. Michael, welcome back to the show, and I am very excited about this.
Max, once again, great to be with you. You're fun to talk to. What can I say?
That's it, really. I think that's enough. We can stop the show right here. I'm fun to talk to. The end. No, we're gonna dive right into this. So when we last had you on the show, it was for your book, The Last Exit, which is starring the interesting pairing of Jen Liu and Chandler. And Jen Liu is a police officer. She's a detective, an investigator. And Chandler, well, he's not quite so present. He's actually a piece of tech in her head. They're back, though, for another adventure, and this time you're taking on climate change, and holy crap, what a topic to be diving into for this book. This book, of course, called The Last Resort, is out on January 10th through Crooked Lane Books. I want to start with that one, though. Crooked Lane Books, who are they, and how did you get connected with them?
Yeah, Crooked Lane is a wonderful indie mystery book publisher. I don't know the number. They do quite a few books a year. So they're not microscopic. They're a decent sized indie publisher, and but luckily distributed by Penguin Random House. So we have both what's nice about working with a smaller publisher, but then they can get the books into stores essentially. But they're just wonderful to work with.
Oh yeah, and the name is so cool. Crooked Lane Books.
It is cool, huh?
It really sounds like they should be doing horror, and I'm sure they probably have a couple horror titles because of the name like that. Jeez.
I know, Crooked Lane. I know but it really, for me, conjures up images of, fairy tales and the things we grew up with, and it's very evocative.
Like Pan's Labyrinth or Into the Woods. All those titles. Oh,
yes.
Man.
Yes.
All right. So why don't you kind of walk us through the story of The Last Resort? What is happening in this one?
Well, as listeners may have guessed by hearing that Jen's partner is a computer implant, you might have guessed it's not happening in 2022 or 2023. This series is set about 11 years in the future in Washington, D.C. And I've got to jump in right away and say, yes, it is a near future story. Bad things are happening, for sure. I mean, bad things are happening now in Washington, D.C. Why should, 11 years in the future be any different? But climate change is hitting hard. There's increasing inequality. But I have to say, this is not, and I repeat, not another one of those grim dystopian books where by the end you just want to, jump off a bridge or something. I mean, it's a fun read. And part of it is because half of it is actually narrated by this bio implant in Jen Liu's brain, whose name is Chandler. And Chandler is he's this wannabe tough guy, but he has a hard time pulling it off because he's only about 3 years old. And so he's got aspirations of or delusions of, if not grandeur, at least toughness. Let me tell you though, Max, the amazing thing that I discovered as I started writing first the first book in the series, and then now The Last Resort. As soon as I started writing the chapters that Chandler narrates, that's about half of each book he narrates. The voice was right there. Readers. I just keep hearing from readers and reviewers, I love Chandler. That's very gratifying. But what I didn't know until I started writing was that he was going to be a full-blooded character. He would change, he would grow, he would evolve, he would be full of contradictions. And so there's with any good character, there's a character arc. I mean, one of the things that gets readers very bored very quickly, and we see this sadly in some series where the character at the end of a book is exactly the same as at the beginning and will be that way forevermore. And the writing might be good, we may like the character, but humans change and we evolve and we face new challenges. Well, I knew this would be true for my lead character, Jen Liu, the detective. I had no idea that Chandler would also be developing as a character. So that's made the writing not only interesting, but a lot of fun for me, just sort of dealing with this thing that could be a totally dystopian element. I mean, God, a computer implant, telling you what to do. But it actually is one of the things that makes the books, makes them fun.
Mm-hmm. How would you?
So yes, but you were asking. I didn't even answer your full question. I got into Chandler.
I know. Well. You know what? Let us talk about the story in just a little bit. I actually want to stick with Chandler because definitely he was one of my favorite parts of the story. This kind of like wisecracking, wannabe tough guy voice in your head. Man, I just really hope he comes with like a volume control or an off switch or something like that, because I couldn't take that all day. How would you say Chandler has grown though from the first book to now?
He's growing up a bit. He's the biocomputer equivalent of a teenager, which
good Lord, no.
If we've ever lived with a teenager, yes. So he wants to, he doesn't want to be told what to do anymore. He wants to sort of assert himself, and he wants to be listened to. He wants to be believed, and so as you said, Jen has this voice in her head. She is able to turn him off, but as we saw in book one, there's no spoilers here, but Chandler learns how to keep himself turned on, basically, and we see that in book in the last resort. He's there both helping drive the plot, but also adding a new complication. And he, in this one, even more than in the first one, helps solve the crime by something he's able to do that a mere human would not.
Now, for the folks at home who may be hearing all this for the first time, let's talk a bit about, what Chandler's purpose is. Why is he here?
So Chandler is part of an experimental program. This is set, as I said, in 2034 in Washington, D.C., and there's for a fairly small number of city detectives and cops, they've been voluntold to be part of an experimental program where they have this chip, this pretty sentient chip implanted in their brain. It's an awful thought, but to help them react more quickly in moments of danger, to give them access to this world of information, to be able to process vast amounts of information, not as sort of an externality to, we look something up on the computer, but as they're working within and at the direction of and on their own of the officer. It's I guess you could say it's also a possible check. It's an extension of a body cam or something. So that's why Chandler exists. And in book one, Jen's boyfriend and common law partner, they lived together, finally discovered that Chandler, the love of his life, Jen, happens to have this eavesdropper. And anyway, it's one more of the many complications that create interest and fun. But you were asking before about this world and this plot, and maybe I should actually answer your question.
I guess, it would probably help to tell people
what this is all about.
Yeah, why not? Well, let's do that thing.
So the series, this Jen Liu series, it's set in the near future, and each of the books in the series are going to will deal with another social issue or economic issue. Now, I have to say, my goal is entertainment. My goal is for readers to turn pages and have fun. But I also think that mystery readers and science fiction readers, because this is a genre-crossing book, I think are smart people. I think that at the same time as, we like to escape into a good book, we also have brains and we want to think and we're engaged in the world. And, we tend to be progressive folks. And so this series does engage with a series of issues. The first one with big pharma, this one with big oil and gas and climate change, but also with the issue of violence against women. And so, but it's not a lecture on any of these things. When I want to lecture people, I either give a speech, which I do for a living, or I read a nonfiction book, which I also do. But this is I'm telling a story, but weaving in things that we need to think about. That we need to think about now, and certainly we'll need to continue to think about in the future. And so this one, The Last Resort, starts with a bizarre accident on a very, very ritzy golf course in Washington, D.C. A woman is struck by a golf ball, and within a couple days, she's dead. And it would just seem as, this is very strange this could happen. And it is possible, but it is so unlikely. But it is possible. It's one of the many things I got to research on that. But what makes it interesting to Jen Liu is that the Patty Garcia, who dies, is a media celebrity. She's being talked about as a presidential candidate. And she's a lawyer. She's a lawyer who has won a huge case in the Supreme Court that's gone all the way up to the Supreme Court that forces the big oil and gas companies to pay climate reparations. That is to say, since the moment that these companies knew that that oil and gas was causing this huge acceleration of climate change, from that moment on, anything that they made in profits, even distributed profits, has to be sort of returned as a payment that would be used for creating a green economy. And in the book, there's a bit of a ticking clock. This is a mystery, and so there's a ticking clock for Patty Garcia to come up with proof that they actually knew decades ago that this was happening, even though they have barely begun to admit it now. And we're talking about the difference of paying billions versus trillions of dollars. And so she's at the verge of this her deadline. Maybe she's found the smoking gun to prove with this proof she needs, and then suddenly she dies in this weird accident. Now, everyone in the world, like 8 billion people on the planet, are convinced it is an accident, except for one person, and that is Jen B. Liu. Even Chandler thinks it's an accident, but Jen is a stubborn person and has a great nose for crime, and she is convinced and starts investigating this. Well, as you might imagine, soon she's in the crosshairs of someone or some entity, or we don't know, well, we do know when you get to the end, that wants to see her out of the way as well. If she's able to prove it's somehow was a murder, as improbable as it seems. So anyway, that's the story. That's the ride that the readers get to go on.
And what a ride. This is so cool. And so much to unpack. But I want to start with the notion of climate change. Obviously, the climate crisis, it's a big part of this book. And certainly, it's all over the news right now. It's every day there's some new story. Is what's going on right now, did this help to kind of frame the story? Did you kind of take like the headlines and put them into the book?
Well, it's certainly been one of my preoccupations for many years. I mean, we as a species, and along with all other species, although they may not consciously know it, are facing an existential crisis, meaning a crisis of our existence. Species are being wiped out at a staggering rate. And we're about to see, and there's no fun book to write about this. We're about to see devastation. We're already seeing it. We're seeing, just in the past few years, these, massive forest fires, flooding, tornadoes, hurricanes, hurricane seasons being extended. And sure, all those things have long happened. We've long had forest fires. We've long had hurricanes, but we're having many more, 1,000-year storms or 100-year storms and disasters. And this is only the beginning. This is only the beginning of the projected concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, because it's quite simple. Humans over the past 150 years have taken carbon that was sequestered in the earth for millions of years. It took millions of years to produce that carbon, and it just settled into the earth and forests and under the ocean. and in a few generations, we're burning it and releasing it into the atmosphere, and it's causing devastation, and it's going to cause not just these natural disasters to increase, but it's leading to it's going to lead to huge areas that are heavily populated being flooded. It's going to lead to massive migrations. We're already seeing droughts emerging in the southwestern U.S. We're seeing that with rivers drying up. We're seeing this in parts of Asia. I mean, the list is going to go on and on. And so, it's hard not to be a thinking person and not to say, okay, we've got to be thinking about this. And so, in writing about it as fiction and in a fun book, this sounds bizarre, but what I wanted to do is actually talk about one of the solutions. And one of the solutions is, I think, to make those who have profited from consciously doing this stuff, I think they need to pay. Now, even though, and this is the big fiction of the book, the fiction of the book, the true fiction of the book is they're trying to find proof that the oil companies knew all along that burning fossil fuels was causing climate change, which of course they denied, and sowed confusion. And I pretend in the book that there's no proof. Well, actually, we have proof. We know, and it's documented that oil companies, including Exxon, for example, their scientists were saying back in the mid 60s, and they actually projected the rate of climate change, and they had it spot on. These were smart people. They knew this was happening. So that is the big fiction of the book. But I wanted to find a fictional way to explore what I think should be part of the solution, which is make those who've caused the problem pay for the problem. Hence that theme there.
Was it a challenge to not make this a very doom and gloom kind of story? Because like you said, this is kind of a fun book. Jen and Chandler, they're almost this like a comically mismatched pair.
What allowed it to be just fun is, I think, a couple things. One is I knew from the start of the series that I had to avoid a couple of things that bad fiction sometimes does. One is when writers show their research. You're reading a book and the writer suddenly has, a page of technical details about something, or the character is going off to some wonderful part of the world, and suddenly it's turned into a travelogue, and you just know the writer, it just wants to show all the research that they did. And so, first of all, I didn't see this as, and the second mistake is to, turn fiction into nonfiction. That is to say, this book is to educate the reader. Well, no. This book is for readers to enjoy. It's to entertain. And so what that meant is I was able to avoid giving speeches about climate change. It's just there. It's just part of their reality. It's just part of their reality, just like it's part of our reality. What really, though, allowed me to not just get sunk is I really truly believe in the human capacity to change. I really believe, and I'm an optimistic person, in spite of this most massive of all challenges that humans will ever face. I believe in our capacity as a species to adapt, to change, to get things right, to turn things around. I'm a real believer in that, and in a way, Jen Liu represents that. She's not an activist or anything like that, although her husband is. But Jen is not an activist. She's not a political person. She doesn't, nothing like that. But she's dogged. She's dogged. She just feels that if something needs to be done and no one else is doing it, she's going to make it happen. And so just that spirit of just rolling up her sleeves and just not stopping and not backing down, I think is a human attribute. I think it's a wonderful human attribute. And I think that's part of what gives the book its, not just its liveliness, but its optimism. And it's a feel-good book, even though it deals with these really serious issues.
How do you remain so optimistic? Because I gotta say, I am losing hope for the future every time I turn the news on.
There are days. There are days when Max, I'm totally with you, and I think that the road to greater disaster is the road of pessimism. One of the things that entities like not just the oil and gas companies, but the big banks and insurance companies that invested heavily in those things, and the governments that continue to support those companies, they want people on the sidelines. They want people thinking, oh, well, if they just buy an electric car and turn off their lights a bit more, that's then the problem's solved. In other words, we should consume our way out of the crisis. They don't want us thinking as social actors. They don't want us really working together. They don't want us imagining a different world. And that's why I think so many of us were so excited a couple of years ago when this Swedish girl, she wasn't even a teenager, or she was barely a teenager, I guess, at the time, Greta Thunberg, decided to start organizing these school strikes. And she just said, this is our future and we're going to do something. And I love that. I think it inspired a lot of people. And I think it continues to inspire a lot of people. When I speak to young people, they're pissed off, and rightly so, at the generations that came before. And they'll just say, why didn't you do more? And they're absolutely right. But they also say, we're not going to get anywhere by just living our life, blaming who came before. It's up to us to bring about change. And that's exciting for me. That's really exciting for me. And it's not just, teenagers. I'm a granddad, and I've got an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and we were driving along with my wife and I with the 8-year-old, and just chatting about this and that, as one does when they're in a car. It was my wife's electric car, I should add, but there you go. But so there we were driving along, and I can't remember how we got into it, but he started talking about climate change, and then he started saying, that his generation is learning about the environment and the ecology, and they're learning, and and they're going to change things, when all of them are older. And what was absolutely lovely was, first of all, he's aware of these things that when you and I were young, we knew about littering, but that was it. But so this generation knows so much, but also just this statement of fact, we're gonna do things differently, and that excites me. That excites me. And that's that party. I think what we have to really hang on to and celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, yeah, that's hard to do, and I'm amazed that your grandson at 8 was on this stuff. I can tell you, when I was 8, I was not thinking about this at all, not even a little bit.
No kidding.
But I do see what you're saying, though. The new generation, I think they're looking at the world and they're saying, what the hell happened to this place? Like, they're basically inheriting this, and they're inheriting a dumpster fire on a good day, and there aren't too many good days. So it's definitely impressive to see this, and my sincere hope is that it's not too late to turn things around.
But it's also, if I can just add one other thing, I mentioned, that they're in this 11 years in the future. Yes, climate change is hitting hard. There's growing inequality. And I think that's one of the things that is driving younger people, because, for our generation or generations, there was always that promise of, yes, we can just, things are going to keep getting better in terms of consuming and producing more and shinier things, and we'll gadget our way out of any problems. And, young people are coming along and they're seeing that ain't happening. There's, more and more people are losing jobs. They're being de-skilled. Machines are increasingly taking over. And it's not because of machines, it's because companies figure they can make more money using a machine than a person. And that's the impetus. And I think younger people are saying this whole way we set up this economy is so out of whack. I mean, not only are we destroying the environment, we're destroying human beings. It's just like this race to the bottom. And so you see a lot of people thinking really deeply about, just about the whole economic system and this idea we have to keep, growing the economy. I mean, Anyway, we won't get into that now, but there's so much there.
Oh, definitely, definitely. So, then let us bring things back to the story. Let's talk about Jen-Lu, your main character. Um, we talked a bit about how Chandler's grown, but how has she grown? Is she a very different person in the new book?
One of the things that's happened, and we find this out early in the book. So, as I say, I'm not going to. There won't be any spoilers in this interview, but at the end of the first book, and I should say this, even though this is the second of a series, it is totally standalone. You can dive into The Last Resort without looking at The Last Exit, although go ahead and get both. But she's gone through. She was almost killed, basically, in The Last Exit, and this is it's. We have this image from TV and movies of police officers who are not only gun happy, they're just pulling out their guns everywhere and shooting wherever. Whereas even in in the United States, which is more police officers use their guns than anywhere in the world, I believe that's still true, like by far. But even there, the vast majority of police officers have never fired their gun in the line of duty. It's a fairly small minority, let alone someone who's killed someone. But so we have this myth that cops are just, maybe there are some who are trigger happy, but most aren't. And but also, if you've been in a near-death experience and if you've had to kill someone, I think for anyone who's not a psychopath, it's going to be something totally devastating. So she's recovering. She's at the beginning, she's a number of months off out of past book one, but she's still and her partner, her actual human partner, is still going through the after effects of what happened in book one. So she's up against some pretty tough realities. She's up against some really tough realities, and yet, as this dogged person, she's just getting on. She's getting on with life. She's getting on with love, and rebuilding her world. One of the things that I love about Jen-Lu is she's not. I say she's dogged, but she's not your macho stereotype. One of the things that I'm not wild about at all. And this is someone who has worked extensively on issues around masculinity and supporting women's rights. That's been my day job, and so I'm someone who for decades has long been critical of our macho stereotypes, of our ideals of manhood, which I don't think are good for the women. Certainly have said they're not good for women, but I don't think they're good for men either. And one of the things that worries me is when I see images of women action heroes who are just adopting just all the negative crap that men adopted. And yes, women should be able to adopt that crap as much as men should be able to adopt that crap. And it's fun to see women kick ass and all that. But the very things that I think have been detrimental to the planet, detrimental to women, and detrimental to men that men have done, I don't like seeing women saying, hey, we can kick ass too. So Jen-Lu is not, she can be tough for sure. She has to be for her job, but she's not, I don't think she's got a macho bone in her body. She's not like, how can I put this? She's just a well-rounded human being. She doesn't have to play it being tough, but she just is, because she's just determined and she's not going to let anything stop her. But she doesn't have to sort of, throw her weight around or put others down. And I think it's in part because of, and here we get into a term that I'm sure many listeners know, intersectionality. That is, we come with different parts of our identity. And Jen-Lu was raised by a single mother who was Chinese, and her father, who she doesn't know and never knew, and whose name she doesn't have, was probably, as far as Jen can figure out, because Jen has blue eyes, which is unusual, although possible for a Chinese woman. But was a white guy, and so Jen grew up with, in the midst of racism that she experienced, and she lived through as a cop a huge upheaval in the DC police force that we hear about in book one, where a group of officers joined civil rights people and unions, and basically said enough is enough, and led to a big transformation within the DC police force. So Jen is someone who, as I say, she's not an activist type. She's not someone who would have seen herself as politically progressive or politically anything, but in her gut, she's certainly on the side of progress. She's on the side of decency. She's on the side of the planet. She's on the side of those who are working for diversity and inclusion. But you wouldn't hear any of those words in the book. It's just this isn't what the book is about. It's just her life and who she is.
Now, you bring up the notion of like the kick-ass female character, and certainly it's a very good point, because you have these female characters who are just trying to adopt all the tough guy stereotypes. But have you come across a good example of a strong female lead that doesn't do that?
Well, I'd have to think about it. I'd have to say yes, because I read a lot, and I think some of the, both in mysteries and in science fiction and non just literature, there's so many great female characters, and gosh, I mean, no one name pops into my brain as I say that. I wish I was someone who could just rhyme off names and titles. I bet you could, Max. But I think that it's part of this incredible enlargement of the world of literature, that we are, talk about good things that we're experiencing right now. When we see the number of prominent, not just women writers, but fiction that is focused around women, whether it's straight ahead literature or mysteries or science fiction, that is aimed at both women and men, as well as those who don't describe themselves within that gender binary. But the number of, and to speak about as a man, I think there's so many men now who just love reading women authors. I just read another book by Emma Donoghue, who's who I just think is an amazing writer, and was kind enough to blurb The Last Exit, and and just the characters that she creates are so stunning. She wrote The Room. She wrote The Wonder, which is now a TV series, which I haven't seen the series yet, but the book is spectacular. Pull of the Stars. Anyway, there's just so many. So we're living in this moment of a real renaissance, I think, of women writers and women leads. That's exciting. Sometimes there are those who treat the opening of greater space as as limiting their world. Sometimes I'll hear men say, and men, white men like myself say, wow, it's now publishers want to publish more women and more men and women of color, and it's going to be harder for me to get published. And I sort of laugh and I sort of say, well, hey, welcome to the world. We've had this 8 or 10,000 year long affirmative action program for men, and in particular, in on some continents anyway, for white men. And it sort of evens things out, but it also, I think, opens such wonderful possibilities that we should just be celebrating and collectively celebrating. And as men, we don't just have to compete with half of humanity, whether it's for a job or for, the publisher you want to publish your book. We have to compete with increasing with everyone. And I think that pushes people to work harder, to do better, but it also can lead to some disappointments for sure. I mean, there is a bit of paying for the sins of our fathers. I think there is some truth to that, and we have to accept that. But basically, this is just such a wonderful time when we, just think of the, just the greater diversity of voices in the world of writing. It's so exciting.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I want to take a step back and talk about your work with the White Ribbon Campaign. This is a group which you co-founded, which works to end violence against women. You're a public speaker who talks a lot about really ending the toxic masculinity of the world. How does all this influence you, the overall story, especially with where your lead is a woman?
Well, first of all, it made me very cautious about having a lead character who is a woman, because we do have a rightful concern in the world of the arts about appropriating other people's voices. And part of the reason when I was first trying to figure out the series that this character Chandler appeared and became a narrator of half the books, I decided early on that Jen would not be the narrator. And it wasn't that her voice wouldn't be valued as the narrator, but I just thought, gee, am I, as a man, and a man who is not a racialized man, be the right person to write her voice? And I decided no. I decided I could write Chandler, even though I've never been a computer, sim. But the other half of the book is just is a third person narrative. So first of all, it made me aware of some of those issues. It also made me, find ways to integrate some of those themes into the book, into the whole series. So, I'm very, it's Jen lives in a world now, in a city, believe it or not, a police force, increasing a country that is LGBTQ positive. Her work partner is a married gay man. So, I want that and I don't make a big deal out of it, because it's just, well, I don't want, it's no more unusual than if her male partner was married to a woman. It's just, he's married to someone he loves, period. So there's no like statement about it. It's just like, well, that's the world. But I want to make sure that that was just part of this world. But what I did do in this book, which I hadn't done in any of my fiction, is bring in the theme of violence against women. And that is, and it comes through one of the suspects, and we find fairly early on, suspects. As I said, Jen is the only person that thinks Patty Garcia was murdered, but one of her suspects is her abusive ex-husband. So there's a bit of stuff on violence against women. That is definitely one of the themes in the book. And it does relate to the work that I've done for a number of decades now, both as a writer, as speaker, as an advocate, as an activist. I've worked now probably in about 50 countries with the United Nations, and different governments and NGOs and companies and unions, to engage men to support women's rights, to work to end violence against women, for greater diversity and inclusion, but also to positively improve the lives of men. And in particular, a lot of that work has been around the transformation of fatherhood, and for those men who are dads to no longer see themselves helping out or babysitting, but to be an equal parent, and both dealing with the challenge of that, but also how wonderful it is to transform men's lives that way. And so this has been my major work preoccupation, and it's been, there's been moments that have just been so incredible. And just to see, the groundswell of men who just say, yes, I'm on side. I want to be an ally with women. And when I co-founded this one campaign, the White Ribbon Campaign, focused on ending violence against women back in 1991, it was the first sort of mainstream public campaign anywhere in the world that was based on the idea that men could be, we didn't use the word allies, but could be allies with women in what was seen at the time as only a women's issue, which is pretty wild, since it was men, not most men, but some men committing the violence. And this idea of men as allies has now spread into our workplaces, into sports. We're seeing this in these amazing demonstrations in Iran, where the focus has been around supporting women and democracy, but women's rights. And the national soccer team in Iran, the male team, basically came out in support of women and women protesters. I mean, this is unheard of stuff, and it's so exciting for me. So it shows a big change is taking place, and which is really gratifying. As I'm not saying I started all that, but what I'm saying is that to see so many men, and as a man to see so many of my brothers now saying, yes, we need to speak out. We do it not out of collective guilt. Max, this isn't about pointing fingers. This isn't about, self-flagellation. This is not about collective blame. This is really, I guess you could say, an act of collective love for the women in our lives, our daughters and wives and sisters, our mothers, our friends, wanting them to have fairness and equality and the same things that, not just the formal rights that we enjoy as men, but just the everyday experiences that we enjoy as men.
Do you feel like this book helps to kind of push that message forward?
I hope so. I hope on different levels. I think on the meta level, when I see men with respect and carefully having a central woman character, I think that pushes it forward, because it just says, this is, every bit as valuable for me to write about a person who is, born, with, these very slight chromosomal differences. We're 98.6% exactly the same chromosomally. So we're the same creatures. But I think what it does is it validates, turns the male gaze away from just objectifying women, and just understanding and appreciating women as subjects of their own destiny, subjects of the world, and celebrating, celebrating women in that way. And so I do see that as an act of allyship. That's sort of at the big meta level. And no one's going to pick and no one's ever asked me that question. I've never even thought about that until you said it. But I think that's part of it. You ask good questions, as I said before. But no, I never thought of that. But I think you're right. That there is, how does something like this contribute to those projects? Because yes, I can write about weave in a theme around violence against women, but that's just a theme that's woven in. But I think there is something much deeper and much more important. And just saying, as men, we should be reading women writers, and B, we should be reading about women characters, good guys, bad guys, all of the above, and just not making them marginal, and not just women in relation to men. There's that whole thing where Hollywood movies get judged by, is there actually dialogue between two women that's not talking about a man? And an astounding number of films historically only have women either talking to men or talking to another woman about men. And so there, it's been a real push to say, okay, women, how to have women as subjects is they exist as full human beings in themselves in relation to other women as well as in relation to men. And so, I think that's, again, part of the challenge. And it is part of the challenge in a book where she's in a police force. Yes, there's more women, and it's much more diverse and inclusive than our police forces now. But there's still more men than women. Her captain is a man. There's a lot of men in her life, basically, and so it's it's there.
All right. Well, Michael, we are coming down to the end of the show here, but I want to talk a little more about the future of the series. So this is book 2 in the Jen Liu series. Where's it going from here? Do you have an end in sight?
I actually do. Although it could change. We find out in book 1 that Chandler is only going to live to be 5 years old. That's how long these implants, exist for. And he's already, into his 3rd year. And, this is the sort of, this book is not a year later. It starts, how many months later? Like 4 or 5 months after book 1. So it is possible to get a number of books into this, basically 3-year period since book 1. And So there will be a number of books. I have ideas for the series. I have a whole bunch of names. You might have detected, being a clever person, a certain pattern in the names. You are absolutely right. Last will reappear. But Chandler is the clock is ticking, and he knows that. And so one of the things that I think is already happening, not I think, that is already happening, and it's one of the things that he's grappling with in this book is mortality. Mortality came up really big in book 1 because there is a longevity treatment in book 1 where the super rich can live pretty much forever, it's looking like. And there's one rich person that is a character in book 1 who reappears in book 2, and is one of these, one of these who've had the longevity treatment. And for Chandler, he'd be happy to get past 5 years, let alone 100 or 2 or 3. So Chandler's dealing with mortality. He's also dealing with both the strengths of who he is and the limits that he has, because he only perceives the world through Zhenlu's senses. He's not he doesn't, he can only, see what she sees. And of course, some of the things that she experiences emotionally, like a smell, he doesn't. He knows what chemicals it's made of, but he doesn't have that emotional connection with a smell, or with he just can record it. So, so I have some ideas of how he's going to evolve, how Jen is going to evolve, things that are happening between, in her relationship. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun ride, and I'm going to, keep putting them out as long as there's some interest. And it's just, it's exciting to see, you go from book 1 and, a new mystery writer. And now, already I've begun to hear from some people who've, pre-ordered, because we're talking before the release, The Last Resort, and just saying they're looking forward to what's happening. So as a writer, that's exciting.
Oh, definitely is. Especially when they say that they've already pre-ordered. It's like, wow, you like it that much that you're actually buying it ahead of time. Yeah, that's big. Yeah. All right. Well, Michael, once again, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a lot of fun. And for the folks at home, I'll tell you where to go. It's Michael Kaufman, KAUFMAN.com. It's all there. Pre-order the book, out January 10th through our good friends at Crooked Lane Books. And Michael, I'm very much looking forward to the next conversation.
Max, I will write another book in the series just to get to talk to you again.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks so much.
Hi, this is singer Kate Eppers, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout.
That brings this episode to a close. And this is it. My last interview of 2022. It has been an absolutely amazing year, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being a part of it. Believe me when I say that 2023 is going to be amazing. That's all for now, and I'll see you next year.